everybody. I'm John Lewis, Editor-in-Chief of Laser Focus World. I'm very happy to be here, and I hope you're having a great week. I want to welcome you to the PhotonicsNEXT Summit, a new immersive day of learning brought to you by Laser Focus World, Biooptics World, and Industrial Laser Solutions. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules today to join us for this unique new event, where we will be focusing on scientific advances, photonics research and development, application solutions, as well as technology and market trends. We'll do everything we can to make sure you find value and opportunities here, and that you're able to network within this community and hopefully make many meaningful connections as well. To that effect, before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping items to mention about the platform that we are using today. Throughout the day, you'll be able to interact with other attendees by posting chats in the live feed on the right-hand side of the virtual session main event page, as well as chat feeds in the individual sessions. During many of our sessions, including this one, the presenters will be standing by to answer questions. You can type your questions into the live feed to the right of the presentation screen or in the Q&A sections. If we are unable to respond to all of the questions during the live presentation due to time constraints, we will get a list of questions to the presenters so that they can follow up with you offline after the event. Lastly, if you have questions about the platform or need help throughout the day, be sure to check out the Help Center by clicking that button on the left-hand side of the page. Alternatively, you can direct message one of our staff members by clicking on the Connect with the Community button, searching for Event Management, and messaging our staff directly. Our staff will be standing by to answer your questions. You can interact with them as well as other attendees throughout today's event. You will also be able to set up one-on-one meetings by clicking on the Connect with the Community button. There you can request meetings or direct message other attendees. Finally, we want to give a huge thanks to all of the sponsors, for without their generosity and participation, we would not have been able to bring this event to you. In that regard, we would like to thank and offer our gratitude to ComSol, DCM Tech, Rotary Surface Grinders, Denton Vacuum, Edmund Optics, Excelitas, Hamamatsu, MKS Ophir, Nubaru, Optimax, OSI Optoelectronics, and Toptica Photonics. All of these companies that have allowed us to provide the day of learning to you are featured in the sponsors section of the site. We hope that you take the opportunity to click on the Visit Sponsors button and check in with them and learn a little bit more about their products and what they are offering to the photonics community. If you'd like to connect directly with a sponsor, just look for the Request a Meeting button on each of the individual sponsor pages. Today's agenda kicks off with this session on laser markets in the age of COVID-19. Other sessions on the agenda today include several quick chats with Laser Focus World Senior Editor John Wallace. The first covers high-power extreme brightness blue lasers for volume manufacturing, welding, and 3D printing. Next, we discuss a novel approach to coating curved and 3D surfaces. Then we have two webcasts covering trends in freeform optics and reflective optics for multispectral systems. Starting at 1:30, we cover next-generation lasers for industrial LiDAR, the advantages of rotary surface grinding glass components, and ultrafast laser optics. At 2, we have a panel discussion on optical simulation software applications, followed by advanced mid-infrared spectroscopic techniques enabled by a tunable optical parametric oscillator. And to wrap up the day, Laser Focus World contributing editor Jeff Hecht will provide an overview of photodiodes and their applications. But getting back to this session, since last January, when Laser Focus World published its annual Laser Market Review and Forecast for 2020, a comprehensive report on the economic and technology trends that are shaping laser sales globally, traditional global economic indicators were pointing to the laser manufacturer challenges, such as a slowdown in manufacturing, persistent political uncertainty, trade conflicts, and weak business investment. Then COVID-19 happened, and SPIE moved Photonics West 2021 to March, and just recently decided to go virtual. Laser Focus World's 33rd annual Lasers and Photonics Marketplace Seminar was rescheduled along with it as a virtual event on March 4th and 5th. Along with that move, we've decided to push our annual Laser Market Review and Forecast article for 2021 to the February issue. But you won't have to wait till February or March, because today, during this session, Our keynote speaker will provide a high-level overview of some of the major trends in the laser market. Now, I'm really excited to introduce today's keynote, Laser Focus World laser analyst Alan Nogee. For more than 8 years, Alan has been tracking hardware trends in lasers, laser-related industries worldwide for Laser Focus World. He has more than 25 years experience in the photonics and electronics industry and hardware and software development, in addition to semiconductor market analysis. In the past, he has been a research director and principal analyst at Instat, where he tracked RF semiconductors, cellular infrastructure, and wireless technology. Mr. Nogee is president of Laser Markets Research and has an MBA from Arizona State University and a Bachelor of Engineering Technology and Electrical Engineering from Rochester Institute of Technology. Today he's going to take an objective look based on quantitative data at the impact of COVID-19 on the 2020 laser market. He'll also provide his perspective and data on specific markets and highlight a few that represent especially interesting developments. These numbers will be finalized when all the 2020 data are available and then published in the annual Global Laser Market Report to be published by Laser Focus World in March. Also, as I mentioned earlier, some of the high-level preliminary data will be published in the February issue of Laser Focus World. Without any further delays, it is my great pleasure to introduce Alan Nogee. Welcome, Alan.
Hello, everyone. I've been asked today to talk about COVID-19 and lasers and how the virus affected laser sales. Well, COVID-19 has affected things in many different ways, near-term effects and longer effects. I look at these as economic layers, not unlike how people in the photonics business would look at light, multiple forms of light, all leading into one light that we see. Economic layers are a bit similar. Economic factors are all added together to get finally what happened in the laser business in 2020. First economic factor layer I see, is how factories closed and lockdowns occurred initially. Now, they occurred in China first when COVID-19 was there, and when it spread to the US and Europe, things locked down and closed in the United States and other places. That effect alone caused a big drop in first quarter revenue for both Chinese laser companies and US laser companies. For Chinese companies, their first quarter revenue for some companies was down about 80%. For US and European companies, the drop was a lot less, maybe about 30%, but still a pretty big drop from COVID-19 and closures. The second layer is really the supply chain and shipping issues that occurred from other companies for companies that make lasers. A lot of laser companies purchase crystals and fibers and diode bars from outside companies. And if they can't get those pieces, then they can't produce lasers as well. Supply chain issues weren't a problem for every company, but they were a problem for some. The third layer is what we're currently in, I believe. Salespeople can't travel. Conferences don't happen live, they're virtual. And if salespeople can't travel, they can't sell lasers. And if they can't sell lasers, they sell less lasers. Another part of this is really just worries. If companies that are to purchase lasers are so worried about the future, they may not buy lasers. And as you'll see shortly, the laser worry affected different segments differently. The fourth layer, if you will, is economic realities. Now, 2020 wasn't a bad year, terribly year, economic-wise, but there's a lot of fears that 2021, this year, will be a lot worse. We'll see about that. So what happened so far and what indicators are there? Well, first, right now, the US stock market is at record highs. That's pretty good. And Christmas sales were very strong. They were pretty normal or even higher than normal. And that's great considering how bad COVID-19 was last year. Worldwide cell phone sales, they think it'll be down about 3 to 2%, I should say. 2.5% on average is the estimate so far. Not terrible when you consider how bad COVID-19 was in many regions of the world. Apple's even expected to have a pretty big increase for the iPhone 12 last year, which is pretty good. Economic-wise, the growth of GDP for the United States is thought to be down about 4.3%, which is not great. But in China, growth is up 1.8%. Not great for China, but still not great, not bad overall. China was one of the top 10 countries of the world in GDP growth last year. As for 2021, we think things are going to be much better. China GDP growth is expected to be about 8.2%. The US GDP growth, 3.1%. Europe GDP growth about 4.7%, and Asia GDP growth of 6.7%. Overall, those values are pretty typical, so we expect a pretty good year this year in 2021. Now I'm going to talk about the individual markets and how COVID affected them. And as you'll see, COVID affected some markets much worse than others. I'm breaking down into the same categories that I do for Laser Focus World Forecast, which appears in the February issue of Laser Focus World. They use certain segment breakdowns, and I'm going to keep this presentation to the same segment breakdowns as they use. The first segment is printing, displays, and entertainment. Yes, these are quite different segments. Let's start with printing. Now, many people last year worked from at home, and their kids learned from at home instead of going to school. So you would expect that printer sales, laser printer sales, would be up last year because people buying printers to use at home. As it turned out, laser printer sales were down last year about 5%. So much for that one. Laser light shows. Well, there wasn't a lot of laser light shows. There were some, but not a whole lot last year. Some of these drone shows are replacing laser light shows, just like laser light shows replaced fireworks shows earlier. In any case, it's kind of too early to tell the full effect of COVID-19 on laser light shows. But the final category is display devices. Now, these are devices like projectors or laser-powered TV sets, a pretty small category, but seeing a lot of growth lately. Now, certainly people didn't travel a lot, didn't go to the movies, so they kind of got bigger screens for their home. And they bought sometimes business type projectors for their home office. So we saw some increases in projector and display sales for lasers last year. It's kind of a slower category to change, so we'll see more this year when things get going more. The second category I want to talk about is image instruments and sensors. Now, the biggest part of the sensor category for lasers is 3D sensors. Now, what that is the lasers up on the top of cell phones that do Face ID, do LiDAR in the case of the Apple iPhone 12, do camera out of focus, do ear detection. There's going to be a hodgepodge of devices up in the phone that use laser sensors. Now, all these sensors are only a few dollars per phone, but you sell 1 billion phones and suddenly the revenue can be quite high. Laser revenue for 3D sensing was over $1 billion in 2020. Even higher, we expect, in 2021. Now, as I said earlier, Apple sold probably a record number of iPhone 12s, and they have laser projectors. Android phones are starting to get Face ID equivalent sensors, and a lot of Chinese phones are as well. So that's a pretty good category to watch. COVID-19 didn't affect that category at all. And there's spectroscopy, flow cytometry, LiDAR. Those are 3 segments that are each $150 million or more in the sensor area. Again, not too much effect of those on COVID-19, or it's been so slow that it's hard to tell. There's a lot of other sensor categories which are pretty small, so they probably won't matter all that much. Medical and aesthetics. This has been a bad area because of COVID-19. Last year, many people delayed their elective procedures. They didn't go to dentists. They didn't have plastic surgery operations. They didn't work on their eyes. So revenue was certainly down for doctors in that respect. And when revenue is down, these doctors don't buy new equipment. Revenue in the medical area for lasers was down 25% last year, the worst area of any of the areas. Pretty bad. When the full tabulation is done, it may be even worse than that. It was down about 20% for dental. Ophthalmology was down about 20% for those lasers. Cosmetic surgery lasers down about 35%. And the only bright spot was surgical lasers were up about 4% last year. But overall, not very good. We expect things to return to normal, though, in 2021. If there's a bright spot in the dental area, at least, it's they determined that these ultrasonic scalers that dentists use, those things that make a lot of noise and vibrate water in your mouth, they may transmit COVID. And that's not very good. So a lot of dentists have stopped using those, and maybe we'll move to lasers a little bit sooner. BioLase, a company that makes these lasers for dental practices, came out with an epic hygiene laser last year to take advantage of this trend. But the dental laser area is pretty small overall, so we don't expect to see a big change. We're expecting 28% increase in revenue this year for dental lasers. We think things will get generally back to normal, and some of the missing lasers from last year, those sales will happen. Scientific and military. R&D and military are two very different things, so let me talk about those separately. R&D spending in the United States overall was up about 2% last year. In China, R&D spending was up about 6%. US spending of R&D and China spending combined is about 50% of the worldwide total. Quite significant. Overall, R&D spending for lasers was up, and I don't believe COVID-19 really will affect that. Most of those lasers are purchased fairly far out, so we really haven't seen a big effect of COVID-19 yet in that area. The military area, completely not affected by COVID-19. Those are big contracts that happen years in advance. But there's been a big change in the last few years, military lasers. A long time ago, we tried in the US to use lasers to stop ICBM missile launch. And then we realized that's a lost cause. But today's military is more concerned with defending itself against drones and small targets. And directed energy laser weapons work really good in that respect. Other countries, Russia, China, etc., use these weapons as well. So the military use of lasers is growing quite well. Overall, we think this category is up 24% in revenue this year, 22% next year. And it also includes things for like infrared countermeasures, use lasers in the military, communications, and other sensor systems. Communications. Well, communications is one area that will probably be up slightly because COVID-19. Now, there was a big transition for people working at home and students learning from home that required them to use the internet at home that wasn't so in the past. So all of a sudden, you have these working people using a lot of internet in residential areas during the day, and students doing the same. That's caused a demand that internet service providers will really need to resolve. Now, certainly, yes, internet goes to residential areas. That's nothing new. But the time of day use is much different. So internet service providers have to add equipment to enhance communications in the US and everywhere because there's more at-home workers all of a sudden. Now, having said that, a lot of these companies want to increase capability, but their field workers also were affected by lockdowns and such. And so many of them can't install the equipment that they wanted to install in 2020. So they'll probably do it more this year. So overall, we think communications equipment will be up about 12%. That also includes optical storage, which is very small. Yes, people worked at home. They bought more laptops, but there wasn't a significant change in optical storage revenue. So for the most part, most of the change was from communications. Materials processing and lithography. Now, lithography is lasers used to make semiconductors, basically. And that falls into two different categories: deep UV lasers, which are excimer lasers, and extreme UV, which is a light source that uses CO2 lasers. That extreme UV is most of the revenue, and most of those are being put out anyway as a transition to extreme UV light. Now, lithography for semiconductors was up about 5% last year. Lasers for semiconductors for lithography was also up slightly. Now, lithography overall represents about 25% of the total. The rest of it was materials processing. Materials processing had a pretty rocky year last year. There was all fears that the economy might not be growing, and that caused some problems. In China, there was a lot of problems with trade tariffs in 2019 going into 2020. But after COVID, a lot of these trade tariff issues got resolved, and a lot of the trade tariffs were reduced because of deals being made. So China's economy really did quite well toward the middle and end of 2020. And their laser companies in China, really, they had record revenues for Chinese laser companies. In the US and Europe, things were a little bit tougher, but overall, not terrible. Although we think that next year will be much better, maybe closer to normal. So economic fears are taking a toll on materials processing of lasers, shutdowns, lockouts. It all affected materials processing lasers, but in 2021, we think things will be better. So as a total, overall, it's kind of surprising, but we think revenue will be up 8.8% in 2020 and even more in 2021. Communications did quite well, and sensors, all new sensors in phones that didn't exist the year before, is really helping that area. So overall, 2020 wasn't such a terrible year after all in most areas. Medical areas certainly wasn't great, but other areas wasn't so bad. And we think 2021 will be a very good year, even making up for a little bit of the lost revenue in 2020, assuming the economy holds out. So overall, things look quite well. Thank you.